Hello everybody, meteorologist Jacob Campbell here with your WeatherNow forecast. So right now we're taking a look at the severe storm risk for today, Wednesday, throughout the southern plains and the Gulf of Mexico region. This has been an updated map from the Storm Prediction Center. And so what we're seeing is we've got this enhanced risk, as I predicted on my last video, throughout Oklahoma City, in the kind of middle Oklahoma area. And then we've got that original area of enhanced risk between Dallas and Hudson, Texas. And then we've got this kind of slight risk area around the rest of it. And so the main threats here, there's going to be some very large hail with these storms as we have very high CAPE values. There will be some damaging winds, although winds are a slightly less worry. And there will be some isolated tornadoes. The tornado risk is about 5% at 25 miles of any given point within these enhanced risk areas. So, and then in the slight risk, it's a 2%. So not a very high chance for tornadoes, but there's still a slight chance for isolated tornadoes. And so these are the CAPE values that we're looking at for the area. So some of these CAPE values are getting up to the 4,000s and between 4 and 5,000 joules per kilogram. And so basically what this means is there will be some very powerful updrafts, and the stronger the updrafts you have, the more of a risk for lightning you have, and the more of the risk for hail that you have. So these storms will probably produce a lot of lightning and some fairly large hail in the upwards of 1 to 2 inches in diameter. So there's not very much shear present in these storms, and because there's not a lot of shear, the risk for tornadoes is lower. Moving on to the storm risk on Thursday. And so what we see is we've got that little enhanced area move to the east, my bad. And so we've got areas of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and the panhandle of Florida in this enhanced risk area. So we see CAPE lower in this area tomorrow, and then we see shear increase. And so because you do have some CAPE, and you've got a higher shear value, damaging winds and tornadoes are the larger risk. Hail is a slightly lower risk, but even with the risk of tornadoes, it's only a 10% chance at any given 25 miles of any given point within that enhanced risk area. So hail is a bit smaller of a risk, tornadoes are a bit larger of a risk, and damaging winds are going to be capable throughout the marginal risk to the enhanced risk areas. This marginal risk area, so the slight risk is from the Florida Panhandle up to southern Kentucky, southwestern Kentucky, and then down into eastern Texas. And then the marginal risk area is just extending from the Panhandle of Florida again up to North Carolina, up to the Chicago area, and then down to around the Houston area of Texas. The surrounding areas can potentially see some thunderstorm development, but nothing too severe for you guys. And this is the CAPE map. And so for Thursday, we see some areas in the Louisiana area that are going to get up to the 2,500s, maybe even inching into the 3,000s. And so this will provide just enough energy to spark those big thunderstorms that could cause tornadoes throughout Mississippi and Alabama. And then that combined with the high shear is producing that kind of elevated risk for tornadoes. Moving on to Friday, we see that system start to move out of the area, and we've got just a little thunderstorm risk for the Louisiana, Mississippi area as just a slight disturbance moves through. We've got this area up here, the Montana, Idaho, Oregon area, that could see just some thunderstorm development, but the enhanced risk has moved all the way to the East Coast, so around the Ralph, Charleston, and Charlotte areas, as well as inching into southern West Virginia, and that's about it. But the risk factors are a little unclear because forecasting CAPE this far out is difficult, and forecasting shear this far out is difficult. So I will give you an update video when we know what the risks are. Large hail looks to be likely because there is going to be an elevated CAPE in this area at the time, or at least the models indicate that. And then also there the models are indicating higher shear values as well. So tornadoes could be a factor in these storms on the East Coast. With any storms, lightning and winds are high concerns. Don't stand under trees during these thunderstorms. And if you hear lightning, when the thunder roars, go indoors. So damaging winds are likely in these because of the high shear, and hail is likely because of the forecasted high cape. But in the surrounding areas, stretching all the way from pretty much southern Delaware to southern Florida, just before Miami, you guys are in a slight risk area, and so you can expect some hail, definitely some severe thunderstorm warnings, which means that you've got winds over 55 miles per hour, or hail over an inch in diameter, or a tornado. And so those all indicate that you've got a severe thunderstorm warning, and so you could see some of those in those areas, but the risks are definitely less than this enhanced risk area. And then we've just got this really thin area of a marginal risk in between the thunderstorm risk and the slight risk, stretching from Washington, D.C. into mid-Delaware through Maryland, and stretching all the way down to the Florida Panhandle, as well as this little marginal risk area for Miami. Moving on to the temperatures, the high temperatures on Thursday are fairly warm. Spring has definitely arrived, with areas in Montana now reaching into the 60s. Montana's been fairly cool for a while now, finally getting some of that warm air. However, that means that more snow melt, and so I'm not sure if there's any snow in Montana right now, but if there is, that means that any rivers downstream, or even in the areas where there is a lot of snow, you're going to experience some very accelerated snow melt, which could cause flooding problems throughout areas downstream of Montana. The Rocky Mountains are also starting to warm up, with some of the areas in the Rockies reaching the 60s, primarily staying in the 50s and some spotty 30s in some of the larger mountains. Once again, if you live downwind of these mountains and snow is melting, you could experience flooding or mudslides or anything like that. And then we've got the Great Plains area, the western Great Lakes region, where there's kind of a spotty mix of 50s and 60s through this area, which is good news, warming up for you guys as well. Same thing with snow applies for you. The New England area is also starting to warm up, getting temperatures in the 50s and even creeping into the 60s in parts of Vermont and Massachusetts. Down the East Coast, warmer temperatures in the 70s and 80s. Florida getting up into the 90s. Parts of Arizona, Southern California also getting into the 90s. West Coast is also fairly warm, 70s and 80s for you guys. And pretty much the rest of the country is going to see temperatures in the 70s and 80s as highs on Thursday. Moving into lows, we can still see there's a definite line right here where two air masses are interacting, and so we can still see that line in the low temperatures mark. So low temperatures to the west of this line are going to be in the 50s, and to the east of this line they're going to be in the 60s. So a really warm night for that Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, southern Illinois, Missouri, Arkansas area. And then if you're surrounding them pretty much and south of there, you can see temperatures in the 50s as nighttime lows. New England is going to get into the 20s for nighttime lows. The Rocky Mountains are also going to get into the 20s. Some spotty 30s and 40s throughout those northern plain areas. And if you live on the mid to southern East Coast, going to be in the 50s and 60s. The further south you go, and on the West Coast, it'll be solidly in the 50s. Moving on to Friday high temperatures, we see that one air mass that was over here yesterday move to the east, and so bringing Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi, and parts of Ohio and parts of Michigan some cooler nighttime or daytime temperatures in the 50s, primarily. Mid-50s region. And then if you live to the west, it's going to be to the east, my bad. There's a whole thing with winds and meteorology. If it's a westerly wind, it means it's coming from the west, but it's going to the east, so that kind of trips me up sometimes. But if you live to the east of this line right here, you get temperatures in the 70s and 80s, and if you live to the west of it, you're going to get temperatures in the 60s and some spotty areas of 50s. But if you live further west of the Mississippi River and of these kind of plain states, the Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana line, you're going to get back into the 70s and 80s as well. Florida warming up still, actually cooling down a bit. They're only reaching the mid 80s today, or on Friday, not the 90s. And then Arizona and Southern California warming up with temperatures pushing close to 100 degrees. The West Coast is going to remain warm, with areas of the northern West Coast getting in the 50s and 60s. And if you live in the mid to southern West Coast, especially on the California coast, you can experience temperatures in the 80s. And low temperatures, we see that air mass has definitely moved in, with nighttime temperatures in Indiana cooling down to the 40s. So it's going to be a cool night for me. Michigan also 40s. Areas really surrounding Indiana are going to be in the 50s, spreading all the way down into mid-Texas. You can experience 50s as nighttime lows, and the northern plains area will experience some 20s and 30s as your high or low temperatures. It's even in the Rocky Mountains. Maine warms up, parts only in the 30s and not in the 20s, so good news for Maine. East Coast warms up as well, temperatures in the 60s. West Coast temperatures in the 50s. So I hope that you all enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video either on Thursday or Friday. Thank you all and have a great day.